Hi, everyone. Welcome to In Conversation with Jessie Thistle. My name is Nancy, and I'm a community librarian at Hamilton Public Library. The book that we are here to talk about is From the Ashes, a remarkable memoir about hope and resilience, and a revelatory look into the life of a Métis Cree man who refused to give up. In this heartwarming and heartbreaking memoir, Jessie Thistle writes honestly and fearlessly about his painful experiences with abuse, uncovering the truth about his parents, and how he found his way back into the circle of his Indigenous culture and family through education. An eloquent exploration of what it means to live in a world surrounded by prejudice and racism and to be cast adrift. From the Ashes is, in the end, about how love and support can help one find happiness despite the odds. Jessie Thistle is a Métis Cree Scott PhD candidate at York University in Toronto, where he teaches theories of intergenerational and historic trauma of the Métis people. As the national representative for Indigenous homelessness for the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, he is a strong advocate for an Indigenous understanding of homelessness. From the Ashes has been included in 10 Best Books of 2019 from Indigo, The Walrus, and Chatelaine, the Globe and Mail's Top 100 list of 2019, Toronto Life's Most Influential Torontonians of 2019, and is a Canada Reads 2020 finalist. I would like to thank Jessie for sharing his written story with all of us and for joining us here today for a conversation. The importance of Jessie's story is particularly clear now as we as a society are asking difficult questions about which social services are truly beneficial to our society, and as we are learning to pull apart the strands of systemic racism. Jessie will be interviewed by Joe Ollmann. Joe is an award-winning cartoonist and graphic novelist described by cartoonist Seth as one of our medium's greatest writers. Joe has contributed cartoons to the Hamilton Spectator and had a long-standing strip in Exclaim magazine. He has 8 published graphic novels, the most recent being The Abominable Mr. Seabrook, a graphic biography of American occultist and journalist William Seabrook. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge where we are. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. So thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to welcome Joe to begin, and Alex, if you could pull up Joe and Jessie, please.
You're all set.
Okay. Are we good to go?
Yep, you're all set.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, thanks everyone for virtually coming to this thing. Thanks to the library and to Jessie for his time. Jessie, we're actually just meeting. We've been looking at each other, but there's been technical issues. So this is our first meeting. So hello, nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you as well.
I just want to start off first by asking the obvious question. How are you doing in the middle of this pandemic that we're in? How is that affecting your work schedule, your home life schedule?
I'm okay. I'm recovered from a back injury because I've been just sitting at my desk and not exercising, and so my core isn't where it should be, and so that was kind of an adventure. But me and the wife are doing IVF right now, and we fertilized 5 eggs, and we found out about that yesterday, so we're really stoked, and I'm doing awesome. I'm doing
Oh, that's
awesome.
great.
What better thing to do in COVID other than get like pregnant and have a kid?
Yeah, it seems a perfect time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. So I want to talk about From the Ashes. Obviously, that's what we're here for. When I finished reading this book the first time, because I've just recently read it again, I immediately went to write to you because I felt I had to like tell you how much this book meant to me. And I see that online a lot. You get deep reactions from people. I think this book affects people in a way that a lot of books don't. It's an exceptionally affecting, moving book. What do you think it is about the book or your style of writing or the story that affects people so deeply that they have to talk to you, they have to tell you how much it meant to them?
I think when we share very specific truths about our lives in our own voice, in our own way, there's a universality to that, right? So my story of addiction, homelessness, finding my way, being afraid of love, sabotaging love, all the things that are in my book are very specific to me as an Indigenous man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that the system's operated. But in those truths, people can see their own lives, their own parallels. People in their own lives that have gone through similar issues might not be the same thing, but the universal truth of suffering and redemption and trying to find oneself, those are universal themes, and so is love. And that's, what my book is about. And I think people, insert themselves into it. They see a little bit of themselves in there because I didn't pull any punches and I was completely honest about everything that happened to me. And so that resonates with people, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's this incredible honesty and unpretentiousness. Like you just tell the story with entire truth, and it comes through. You feel it, you sense it, like deeply in your bones. Were you like, this book has been on the bestseller list for how many weeks now?
Well,
10?
I'm waiting for no, it's been on for 45
More.
weeks.
45.
And it was
okay.
number one for 18. So
Yeah.
which is for an unknown author. That's no, I don't know if anybody else has done that.
So were you surprised by the success of the book, or did you have a sense when you were writing it, when it was finished, did you think like, this is really good, this is going to affect people?
No,
Or no?
I didn't think I thought maybe 2 or 3 people would read it. I'm a professor, so I literally had planned that I would publish my book, and then by the time September rolled around, because I published it at the beginning of August, that the hype would have died down and I could get back to my life as a professor. But that just didn't happen. It just keeps gaining steam, and so I'm just grateful that anybody took the time, and I really thought maybe, my closest family and friends and some other people would read it, but it's got its own legs. It's its own phenomenon now.
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's amazing and it's wonderful. I'm so happy. Like, it's just like, to me, it feels like it's a really important book. Like, because when I read it, what struck me is like, you're a homeless person, you're an addict, and people could walk by you on the street and dismiss you as a person, and people do that every day with homeless people. But you get out of that, you come out of all of this, you rise out of the ashes, you become, an award-winning academic. Like you got the Governor General's Award in your program. So to me, I think people reading this, they would have to re-examine their thoughts on people on the street, like that you can't just dismiss people. Like, there's so much potential if there were opportunities given to people.
That's
you know
right.
What I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to challenge people that way. I want people to take the time to get to know the homeless people around their area. They could be the next Trudeau Vanier Scholar, Governor General winner, someone who writes a best-selling book. You don't know. It's the systems that are arrayed against that person that are equating to their homelessness. And so it's up to us as citizens to, not be so apathetic and take the time and care and give homeless people opportunity, because they have potential. They're just in these systems where there's no growth for them.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the whole system is structured to like, I just think from the physical impairments, like the benches with the stupid dividers so that people can't sleep on them, and people, those buildings where they put barriers where people can't sleep. Like, this is the most tiny comfort, like a place to lie down out in the cold, you know, and they try and take that away from people, and just the policy of the police of ticketing homeless people for vagrancy or whatever. All these, like, you paid off a bunch of during your recovery, you paid off all those fines, and that was one of the things in the book where I was pissed. I understood your reasoning; you wanted to be like clean and clear and reparation and all that, but I was just like, you shouldn't pay those tickets. Like, it seems criminal to me. Like in Hamilton here, there's so many cases you read about of police just constantly issuing tickets for panhandling. These people have no means of paying these tickets.
No.
It's basically just a policy of harassment to maybe make people move on.
That's right.
It just seems terrible to me that's our structure. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about. Well, first, this is a question that's probably annoying and could be annoying. But like, do you feel with From the Ashes being such a successful first novel, do you feel any of that curse of the successful first book, like that there's a great deal of pressure for what you might do next, or you don't even think about that, you just work on what you're working on?
Yeah, I don't. This is not my most successful piece that I've written. I wrote the definition of Indigenous homelessness that's gone on to transform how the country administers care to homeless Indigenous people, guiding millions of dollars of policy. So this little flare from my literary work is actually small compared to the contribution that I've made in academia. And so for me, it's just, this is like a side thing that I did. And there's no pressure. There's no pressure for me to succeed on my next book. And I know it's going to be a better book than this one, and it's going to be more successful, I'm sure of it, because of the story is a lot more heroic than my own. And so, yeah, some people have asked me, and I'm just like, no, there's no pressure for me, because like I got like 5 different jobs. So this is just one of the things that I do.
That's an incredibly healthy attitude to have, like, because I just know people, they put too much pressure on themselves for the audience of a book, or what, like in the world of comics, I see that with people. They'll direct the way they're creating a project to direct it towards a certain publisher or something, and I think it ruins the work. Like, you should just be true to the work and the story you want to tell, and not consider the audience, not consider the final product. They just do the work, right? I
agree. It's like, for me, after I wrote the book, it's really none of my business how other people think about what I wrote. It's like, does Leonardo da Vinci care about how people think about the Mona Lisa? He's dead 400 years. It's a piece of art. You do it, you put it out there, and if you're not doing it to create and express, and you're targeting people or trying to manipulate people's reaction, then it's not really art. It's not a true expression of your life. That's the way I look at it. So, and I've heard Johnny Depp actually talk about his movies that way. He just doesn't read any of the reviews or even watch his own films. He just does them, and he's on to the next thing. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to take that approach, but sometimes I'll go to the reviews and, let that fill my head for a little bit. But my elder told me a long time ago, never listen to the clapping hands of the crowd, because that can inflate your ego, and then you have to let the bad stuff in too. So I'm trying to be healthy about all this.
That sounds like you've got it dialed in good. That's great. I wanted to get into the structure of the book itself, like the physical structure. You've got they're short episodic chapters, and it seems like each chapter revolves around an important incident that adds to the story, the structure. And then you divide it with these poems that sort of divide up sections. Was that format intentional, or was it? What was your thought process behind how you structured the physical structure of the book? Or did it just come like that?
No. Yeah, a lot of it comes out of my AA program. So I was writing down my 4th step. It's called your moral inventory, and I I'd been doing this since I got out of rehab in 2008 and 9. And so I had to write down all the different things that I did wrong to people and that other people did wrong to me, things that made me feel shameful, things that I needed to make amends for. And I wrote them on cue cards and I collected those over time. And after a while, I had this big stack of them and I put that on a blog. And so I'd also be writing poetry about the different parts of my life and how I felt about them and whatnot. And so when I started working with Lori at Simon & Schuster, all we did is we took those AA 4 steps, we organized them into a meta-narrative of my life, 35 years, from 3 to like 36, 37 years old when the book ends. And I tried to use a technique called literary realism. So what I wanted, my idea was to take the reader and just drop them into different segments of my life and then just show them what happened. Not tell them, just show them, the events that created me. And it's a very present type of writing where it should read like you're watching a movie. So you can't really tell what people are thinking because there's no reflexivity in the way that I write. I don't like say, oh, I feel this and that. I just show you what's going on.
Totally,
and then the poems actually are the only reflexive parts of the book, and so I couldn't intersperse them in the actual narrative. So what Lori and me decided was, well, you're actually talking about this specific incident with this poem, but you're a lot more reflexive and you're showing people how you think and what's actually going on inside. So let's put that before each chapter or after each chapter, and then what that does is I show you and then I reveal how I feel, or I show you how I feel and then I reveal why I feel that with the book. And we did that the whole way through. And the final piece of why the everything's in such short chapters is I was scrolling through YouTube and I came across this old drunk guy from the 70s. His name is Charles Bukowski, I think his name is. And he's a famous writer from the 70s. He was just drunk talking about like good writing. And he's like, people don't write with pace anymore. People don't write with like, this is the modern era. We live in the atomic age. We need to have pace in our writing. And so I really took that to heart. And I said, well, when I read a book, I like to be rewarded that I finish a chapter. And so if I keep the chapters small, it's a trick that they're going to want to finish the third, and then they say, oh, I can do the next one. And then they do the next, and they just keep going until half the book is gone, right?
Yeah.
And they consume it that way. And so, all that made for a really quick read, and that's why it's structured the way it is.
That makes total sense. And a lot of people have commented on that, like how they finish it in a period of a day or 2 days, and like it's super compelling in the way you've structured it. Also, the poetry is good. That's what poetry is hard to pull off, and it's good poetry. I don't love poetry, but I loved your poetry. Like I think like you said, it's a different voice. It's like an older, wiser voice, and it's like reflecting on what's coming up in this next part. And you're right, that's the only reflexive part. The rest of it you're just showing, and that's really effective. Okay. Okay, so you was it hard for you writing honestly about your own failures and the failures of the adults in your life, or were you far enough away from it that you felt it was okay to, or is it just honesty is important? I think it's like saying things out loud is important. You can't get better. You can't heal things unless you say things out loud. I feel is super important. It was hard. It was
difficult. Sorry, go ahead.
So I was just thinking, like, in terms of reaction from your family to the book, like, what did they think of it?
Oh, my brother Josh loves it.
Yeah.
He's the RCMP and he's now retired, and he took it to his therapist, and there was a lot of things that he couldn't talk about. But his therapist, and through the book, the therapist understands my brother, and he's healing in a way that he couldn't before. My other brother Jerry, me and him are kind of at odds right now. It's sibling rivalry type of stuff, and we'll be back together again. But on the whole, my family really appreciated and liked the book. There's only two people that I know of that were upset with anything. And the other one's my Aunt Sherry, and she's just upset at the way I depicted my grandfather. But like I had to be honest and, you know, share my truth, and that was what happened. And so she had a different perspective of him because she was his favorite child. So he treated her differently than he treated everybody else. And so,
there's different dynamics in families, and some people get much fairer treatment or kinder treatment. Speaking of your grandparents, they really stepped up. They did this thing of taking in three young boys and taking care of you, which was amazing. But you're very honest about they were pretty rough. Like, I mean, your grandfather with his old school tough love. You see the love you have for him. It's all there, but it's also like the honesty of how you guys were treated by them, and that kind of old school tough love and the effects of that. It's that was common in that day. People physically hit kids. It's insanity to think of in our present time, but that was normal when I'm 55, and that was normal. Like growing up, people hit kids, teachers hit kids. It was it's so unhealthy and wrong. What was I going to say about your grandparents? My notes. I'm just off the cuff here. So they did this, but how much of like your grandfather's that kind of never speaking of your feelings, the really unbending nature, like how much of that do you think would have maybe given your father some of the problems that he had with addiction, like being raised in the
definitely.
Definitely. And it's multi-generational, right? Your grandfather was traumatized. He had to go to work when he was a little kid.
His father died, right? And really the story of my book is a story of broken men, right? Over generations. And my grandfather was raised by his grandfather, who was from the Victorian era when like kids had full-time jobs 16 hours a day in the coal mines. And so my grandfather was traumatized, you know, working like a man from the age of 5 or 6 all the way through. And so he just didn't understand even what childhood was. He didn't he's like, if you're young, you have to start working. And so he was training me on a skill saw when I was 5 and 6 years old. Jigsaw, drill. But, you know, it might have damaged my dad and, you know, forced him out of the house. But ultimately his lessons of hardship, being hard and working and applying myself, saved me in the end. It was his work ethic that pulled me out of where I was. It might have also put me into where I was, though, too. So it's a double-edged sword, right? It was a good thing for me, but it was also a really bad thing because men should be able to express themselves, should be able to emote, and that's okay too, right? And we were never allowed to do that, right?
That's a friend of mine was just talking to me about that. He belongs to a men's group where they talk about their feelings and that, and he was embarrassed even talking about it. But he was having trouble with fatherhood, and he joined this group, and he grew up without a father, and so he had difficulty being a father when it was his time. And so he talked about that, like just how good it was to be able to talk openly about feelings, to be able to cry, to be able to not have this carapace of macho, you know, toughness all the time. I think we'd be a healthier world if we didn't have all of that. Like
for sure we would. And I don't know why that's been normalized. There's, you know, but it's not healthy for a lot of men. You know, there are some men that aren't very emotional, and for them, I guess that's okay. But for others, like me and my brothers and most other men that I know, we should be able to express ourselves and not feel like we're like, you know, feminine or whatever. That expressing yourself is a masculine thing too. You know? You know, and it shows strength, you know, to be able to open yourself, and that's real strength, real courage, you know, where the other one's kind of a shield. It's like a front on courage, a front on strength, you know. That's what I think anyways.
I think you're right. So with your grandparents, it was a kind of like you know, like everything, it's cut both ways. They were great in so many ways, and you could see the love. It comes through entirely in the narrative. But they're, you know, like also your grandmother, like, you know, you guys are like traumatized kids who have, you know, food scarcity issues, and you're eating the cheese slices. Someone ate the cheese slices, and she's like threatening to send you to Children's Aid or whatever. I don't know if there's like, I don't know, like people were cruel to children in those days, and I think it was normal. You didn't feel you had to explain yourself. It was just like, I'm the boss, and it's an unhealthy way of raising kids, I think, and it was normal at that time.
Yeah, it was like, there was no pampering whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah,
And like, I remember going to school, and like, if I came home crying from a fight, then like I was sent back out.
yeah,
You know, you recapture your honor, and you're supposed to win those fights. And so it was a brutal way to
yeah.
raise kids back then. And I knew other families that were like that too.
Hmm.
And you know, some say that the younger generations are coddled, and they don't have enough of that. So I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not, or what's healthy. I'm going to be a father, hopefully in the 9 months from now. So get back to me in 2 years, and I'll let you know.
All right, we'll check in. We'll check in on that one. I imagine you'll be the kind, coddling type, and that's good. So the idea of forgiveness is a really important thread, like throughout the book, especially in the end. But in every recovery, there has to be reparation for things. And do you feel like, are you done with that? Is it, are you feel like, are you at a stage in your life, or is it ongoing? It's always ongoing.
No, I have to do walking amends every day. There are people in my past that I hurt that I can't go back and apologize to.
Yeah.
Because it's just the damage I did was so bad.
Yeah.
And how I try to fix that today is I try to contribute to the world in a good way, and try to, like, you know, help homelessness, like on a national level. That's part of me doing my amends for like stealing someone's jacket when I was on the streets. I let them freeze while I took their jacket to survive. You know, I didn't put that in the book. There are other things that I do every day to try and teach people about their culture, because, you know, I just, you know, it's called a walking amends, and they're really important. And I'll always have to do other kinds of amends, where I actually go and talk to people and say, look, I'm sorry for the way I was. And I've been contacted by a lot of people that are actually in the book that I did wrong to, and they say, I understand now, man. Like, it's okay. You know, I thought you were a-hole for many years, but I understand now. And through your book, you've made amends to me, and we actually make amends, you know, and that happened with Karen, the girl that I broke her heart when I was just a kid. Right. And so it'll be going on for the next 30, 40, till I'm dead. I'll be making amends with people. Yeah.
Well, I think everybody should be doing that, though. Do you know what I mean? Like, we should always be looking back and making amends for things we've done, and try and improve things. And I think that's really wise what you said about this. What did you call that? Walking
amends.
Walking amends. Okay, I like that idea, because there are some people you can't make amends to, and they don't want your amends. They're like, no. But there is a way of, you make things better in your circle and around you, and what you can do, and that helps take away that. I think that's so important. That's amazing. That's really wise.
Yeah, and no, this is wisdom from AA and my program that I learned back when I was in rehab. So it's not my wisdom. It's much smarter, greater people thought this, and I learned it from them.
Yeah. Now, your half brother Daniel, that I have to say, like, I'm a grown man, and when that scene where you meet him, I was like so jealous, and I was so like, I know you had a good relationship with him at later, but that scene is heartbreaking. It's just like, oh God, like, it killed me. Like, I'm a grown man, and I was dying of jealousy, like that him hugging and everything, and you not having that, and oh, it's a heartbreaker. But you've developed a good relationship with them.
Yeah, he was my wingman. I stole a suit
Yeah.
at my brother's wedding.
Yes.
He watched out for me. And
Yeah.
when I went back in 2013 to connect with my Métis Cree family in Saskatchewan, he was there.
Mm.
And we hit it off right away. And he's my little brother, and he calls me all the time, and he's annoying, like a little brother's supposed to be. And he always asks me to buy him stuff, and I buy it for him because I'm an older brother and I'm supposed to take care of my little brother. So we eventually grew, and we have a close relationship now. But yeah, man, when I first met him, I was so jealous of him, and I was
Yeah.
mean to him too, right?
Yeah.
Because I felt like he took my mom away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And like, how could she have this other family with me and my two brothers waiting for her to reappear in our lives?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but that's not fair to Daniel. As I
Yeah.
grew later in life, I realized it wasn't Daniel's fault. It was no one's fault. This is just life,
It's
right?
just stuff that happens, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
hard, but it just happens, yeah. You and your brothers were briefly in the foster care system, like
Yeah.
outside of your living with your grandparents, and it's horrifying, and it's a machine, like it's a horrible machine that grinds up largely Indigenous and Black kids in this country, and it's an awful system, and I just wonder, like, do you have any thoughts on like that whole system and how it could be like improved? Like, there's obvious things like stop taking kids away from people, but I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. Like, things happen to my brothers in there, not to me, but I was witness to that, like, damaged, my family. And so it was really still traumatic to think about, right?
Yeah.
And like, I've thought about this a lot. I was just on Native Child and talking with them. They're like the native arm of CAS in Ontario, and they're asking me, what can we do to change this so this doesn't happen again? And I said, well, maybe if we have a situation where the kids aren't being cared for or they have been abandoned, maybe call the Indigenous family instead of the white family, like what happened with me. Maybe if we see a problematic family like my mom and dad and us three boys, take the man who's the problem out of the kin network instead of the kids, and work to preserve the mother that's raising those kids. Give her the foster care money that you would have given a foster care parent.
Yeah.
And why didn't they do that? Why didn't they call my mom? Why didn't they? And so all these things really are about keeping Indigenous families together, right? Instead of focusing on the kids and trying to rescue the kids, you should be trying to rescue the I don't know what you call it, the solidity or the kinship of the family itself. And I think if we did that, provided adequate housing and funding to keep the families together, we would have lower rates of homelessness, addiction, trauma later in life because they've gone through the system.
Yeah.
And so that's just my opinion. I'm not an expert in this field, but just from personal experience, I think that would have helped.
Yeah, I just think, like, with so much of this country's dealings with Indigenous people, it's like Tracy Lindbergh said in her Massey lecture. She said, we are effed up because you effed with us. Like, it's this multi-generational trauma that's passed on, and this interference in a wrong way, in a bad way, in a harmful, ineffective way. And our government, talks a lot, but really does nothing finite to improve and to follow the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's findings. Like, they promised to honor them all, and I don't think that there's been anything done. And
I think maybe 6 have been addressed, which is horrible. There's like 100 and something of them. It's really bad.
Yeah. When they announced that they were going to honor all of them, the fact that they did that commission and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Commission, was like hopeful to me. I was like, oh, they're taking this seriously. They're actually investing in this, and you know, I remember being in the car driving when they released the findings, and people reading the Truth and Reconciliation things, and I'm in the car, I'm weeping my guts out hearing this stuff, and I'm thinking like, this is amazing. This is a chance for this country to actually make a positive change and try and redress some of the massive wrongs that have been done in the past and are still being done. And then it just fizzled out. And I don't know what can be done to prod this government into action. The only action they seem to be taking is like fighting to keep Indigenous children, money away from Indigenous children. That was a court case that was going on. I don't know. It's depressing, and I know the alternative is worse. I mean, you have the conservatives who are, in my opinion, that just like would do nothing. So, but anyway,
I think it starts with land back. I think that's the fundamental piece that's missing that they always just don't do. And so with land back, communities can rebuild, and I think they should have the right to tax people on their land. They should be able to invest that tax money in infrastructure and do things that nations do. And like each, you know, treaty where there's crown land available, the province and the feds should work together with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit to give that land back. And from that, you will have the money and revenue to build out social programs. You'll have education programs. People would stay in their communities more than they do now, and on and on and on. So, and that I really, I think about this a lot and look at social policy and what's actually missing, and it comes down to finances most of the time, and the federal government just does not want to put the finances in or give the land back, and so
it's not a priority. But the land back is an amazing idea, and I think it's possible. It's just has to be embraced and done. Where it would have seemed like such a radical idea a few years ago, but we're ready to embrace radical ideas now. Like, they're not radical anymore. Like, you know, the present conversation about defunding the police, that's a radical statement. Nobody in the mainstream would have been saying that a year ago. But that's these ideas come into the mainstream just by circumstances. In America, people openly saying the word socialism before Bernie Sanders made that a possibility. If you said socialism in America, that was insanity. Now it's kind of mainstream. That's, to me, is remarkable. So I'm a very cynical person, and I'm partnered with a woman who is very positive and looks on the bright side of things. She's a realist. She's a professor, and she's wise, and she keeps me grounded, because I'm just like prone to dark holes of these things. But you talk a lot in the book about your partner Lucy, who is your manager, your partner, your friend. Talk about that. Like she's in the book right from the beginning almost. You meet her when you're kids, and then she shows up again, and it's amazing. Like that, when you guys get married, it's like this amazing, like anytime something good happens in your book, because it's so harrowing. When something good happens to you, it's like, it made me cry. When the RCMP guy doesn't hassle you about collecting change, when the tough Chinese lady in the grocery store gives you food and sends you off and says, "Don't come back here again." That made me like weeping. Like it's
oh,
so
really?
moving. Well, these small kindnesses in this for this poor kid who's homeless and struggling and desperate, and these tiny acts of kindness mean so much. But anyway, talk about Lucy. I want to.
Yeah, Lucy is my life today. I met her when I was young. I was a nerdy kid, and she was among the popular girls. And I always, I liked her back then. And she didn't really remember me when I bumped back into her years later when I was an adult at a party, my brother's party, the night I fell, actually. And so she'd always been there throughout my life. And it wasn't until I got sober and I started to like really take life seriously that she came back in, and what she brought was love and trust and understanding. And like at that time, I was, off and on the streets for 10, 11 years. I was in and out of the justice system. I was coming out of rehab from a really hard crack addiction. And this woman trusted me. And she said, "You can come and live with me and give it a go." And the door is open, and like no hard feelings if it doesn't work out, but like we can make a go of it. And I don't know, it felt like so good to be loved and trusted by someone. I don't know if you've ever not had that in your life where people just don't want you around because they can't trust you, or they don't confide in you, or they don't share themselves with you. That was years and years for me. So when this like beautiful woman, that I had a crush on in grade school started doing that with me, I was like, wow, she's way out of my league. I remember phoning her and like having a shower before I got on my Skype meeting, combing my hair and just like making myself perfect for her, because to me, she was a goddess and she still is a goddess. And I'm the luckiest guy on the earth because I got to actually marry the woman of my dreams. That sounds really cheesy when it's coming out of my mouth, but I actually feel that. And like, she's cool, like she's actually cool. Like you get along with one of your buddies, like your best mates,
Yeah.
kind of like we get along like that.
Yeah.
And we just respect each other, and we always have, and we work together, and all the things that people advise couples not to do, work together, start businesses, be friends and like buddies. We're all those things, and it works out for us. I don't know. We're just destined to be together. That's how it is. And she's taught me a lot about love and trust. And, I was pretty rough around the edges when she first found me, right? And she's been shaping and molding me emotionally since that time. And I hope I'm giving her, helping to shape her too. She doesn't really talk about it, but I'm sure it's a mutual thing. We're growing together.
Of course. Yeah. It's perfect, and it's amazing to have that in a partner. Like, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you. I got a bunch more questions, but I don't know if we're gonna run out of time, but I wanted to ask about your work in academia. Like I was talking, we have kind of addressed it. I was talking about the idea of home in the book. There's like different homes, like Saskatoon and Brampton is a big part of home, and then having no home, and then a home in like an ideological home in academia or with your partner Lucy, or was that like an intentional, like, I mean, it's a book about homelessness, so obviously the idea of home is going to appear in the book. You're now living in Hamilton. How does that compare to like Brampton or?
Yeah. No, it was all into. I love Hamilton. Hamilton's like, it's a little grimy. It's a little tattoo shops, but it's also wicked food and awesome art and friendly people. And there's a lot of visibility of Indigenous people here. I have a neighbor who's Indigenous. I've never had that. And like, I like it. I like it for the way it is. It's unpolished. It's honest. It's hardworking. It's all these things, right? And that's where great art comes from, right? I'm sure in 10 years, hopefully the fabric doesn't change too much with the outside people that are coming and changing everything. I know I'm part of that wave, but
me too.
The way things are, it's just beautiful. But really, the book it's about homelessness, but really home to me is about love. That's where your home is, right? And so the book itself is actually a long inverted plot line about love, right? I'm with the love of my family around the road allowance with my cookum and mushum and my mom and my dad and my brothers. And that's all of a sudden taken away. It just like ends there, and we end up in CAS. And then my whole life is a quest back to love, back to finding my home. So that's what the story is about. And it's here in Hamilton, I feel that love. That's for sure.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure when we're going to start asking questions, but I have one more quick question. I want to talk. You're a PhD candidate right now at U of T. Is that correct?
At York University.
York, sorry. Okay, York. Oh, that's my wife teaches at York. What does your work entail there? Are you teaching?
Yes.
You are. Okay.
I'm teaching Indigenous Introduction to Indigenous Studies in Canada, and then I teach 20th century Métis history, and I focus on what are called road allowances. So these liminal spaces that Métis were pushed into by the state over 100 years after 1885. We came to live basically in the ditches on the sides of the roads because we couldn't access settler society, because we couldn't borrow money, we couldn't own land, we couldn't get jobs, and on and on. And so I study that, and that's what my PhD is about.
That's a super important work, I think, especially in this country, this colonial country, sort of writing a truer version of history than we've been presented with throughout time in this country. Like I'm seeing like statues of Columbus being torn down, and I'm just like, right on, let's do it. Like and I think so. It's important. Indigenous scholarship and academia, especially in terms of history, super important in this country to tell the narrative in a truer sense, like than we've been fed.
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
definitely. And my work centers on telling one of those narratives, threads that haven't been talked about, which is Métis history, Michif history. And you talk about like statues being torn down. There are, massive statues all over Southern Ontario dedicated to 1885, the Northwest Resistance, because this is where all the soldiers came from. So it's lionized in places like Port Hope, around Queen's Park. There's like a big commemoration for the battle, and they're celebrating it. So for me, that's the battle that crushed my family and stole our land.
right.
And that's part of me challenging that and saying, we need to, if not tear them down, we need to at least put a plaque beside it and say the fallout from this was that it like impoverished Métis people for 100 years, and we need to address that, and yeah, we're on the precipice of that happening. It's happening with other statues, and soon I'm confident that people will start addressing this traumatic Métis history.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I'm not hearing from Nancy, so I'm just going to keep asking you questions. I want to talk about drug reform, like I mean, we've legalized marijuana in this country. That's a thing that's been used to target and harass Black people, Indigenous people, and that people are, have gone to jail for that, such minor things. What do you think of, like, in say Portugal's take of legalizing every drug and then offering counseling to people? Yeah, me too. I just think it makes so much sense, and it's worked so effectively in that country. And I think you can't criminalize people for addictions. No. It's like, it's madness. Like,
no, well, if you criminalize and you put a prohibition on drugs, then you're going to create a criminal atmosphere. You're gonna create high demand and high profit, and what that does is it creates criminal enterprises. And you don't have to look any further than the Volstead Act of 1919 south of the border, and how that helped create the Italian mafia, right? If you outlaw substances and criminalize the users, that just drives them underground and drives prices through the roof. And so we see that in marijuana, we see that with cocaine, we see that with heroin. All these things are run by criminal enterprises. So if you want to lower crime and help people get better, you decriminalize. And then you stop looking at addiction as a punitive issue, and you start recategorizing it as a health issue, right? People have started to take a substance and they are now sick. from their use of that substance. That's the same thing as what's happened with people with diabetes. They took an outside substance, now their body's reacting and metabolizing it differently. We don't stick people that are diabetic, type 2 diabetic, in jail to reform from their diabetes. We give them insulin or metformin. Why don't we do that with people that are using? It's just simple sense. And the proof is in the pudding. You look at like what happened in Portugal, and their rates of recidivism went down, their rates of addiction went down, their organized crime went down. And so they can't say that it's not effective, right? We have that model that works.
Yeah. Your diabetes analogy is amazing. I'm gonna start using that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's
it's just ridiculous the way that it's the moralization of drugs. That's the problem. It's people who say that the drugs are bad, right? Well, sugar's just as bad for your system. It kills you, and it costs actually way more for the taxpayer over time than it does compared to all drug addiction. The addiction to sugar, right? And this is, it's just because sugar's been around for 400 years that everybody's normalized it. But
socially acceptable.
There was a time when that was looked upon the same way that we look upon cocaine today. Right, it's just a tenure of time that it's been in our society where people accept it and they're not moralizing it anymore. Sorry, I'm going off. This is my professor hat on here.
No, that's good, Professor Thistle. Let's. Your father is a character briefly in the book. At the beginning, we get a bit of him, and then he's gone, and you end the book with the poster of the missing person poster. Do you ever get any updates or anything from? No.
Peel Police contacted me about a month after my book came out, and they said they got a report or a tip of a homeless man, 65 years old, that went by something like Searle or Sonny, who lived in the Rouge Valley with a dog. And they went and investigated, and it wasn't him. So that just ended there, and that's the last kind of real, tip that I've gotten from anybody. And like one of the purposes of me writing my book and telling my story was to help find my dad. That's why his missing persons report is right on the last page, because each person that buys the book, they're actually helping me look for my dad, and there's been, I don't know how many thousands of books have been sold. So that's thousands of people now that know to look, keep their eye open. And, if you see a man around 65 that kind of looks like that, give Peel Police a call and let us know. Cause our family really, all we want is closure and find out what happened to him,
Yeah, having that not knowing is cruel and hard. It's hard to live with. Like, I can't imagine that. People need closure.
It's sorry.
No, it's okay. I want to talk about your prose. Like, it's really evocative. Like it feels like a 1970s childhood. You get it all, really Kraft Dinner and CBC radio on, and there's that scene where you hate fish cakes and you hate the raw onions in them, and I was like, I was thinking of my mom used to make something like that. There's always one dinner that you hate, and it's also real. Like, was that easy to summon up all this stuff? Is it like, it felt immediate, like it felt like you were right there and I was right there? Like, was that easy to do?
Not really. It was just, I think as someone with complex PTSD, I'm like a time traveler. So moments in my life are crystallized into my memory that I can't forget. And I remember the minutia of it. Right. And so that was really, that chapter that we're talking about was about me when I stuck that kid up around the block. That traumatized me when I robbed my neighbor. And so that night is burned into my skull. And, it was about raw onions and fish cakes. It was about family ties. It was about, like all the things from that period. Right. Yeah. So I just remember them like that, So
all those details do come back. You do it so well. Okay, now I have a message from Nancy here saying that they've got some questions. So good to wrap up. So I'm gonna, I'll go off and you can answer people's questions. Thanks
Okay.
for talking with me. I really enjoyed meeting you, and thanks for this book and for all your work. It's a real pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Joe. It's been an honor to talk to you, and I'm sure I'll see you around the Hammer sometime, you know?
I want to meet up in real person. I want to give you my book. So we'll talk later.
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much, Joe. So Jesse, we have a we have a question from Deborah. She asks, if you could start your life over, would you change your journey, or would you want the same journey and keep everything you have gained from this one?
Yeah, that's sometimes I mourn the 10 years of my life that are just evaporated and gone. All my friends have kids that are finishing high school, they own homes, you know, they're on their third car, all the things that, like, you know, 40-year-old people are supposed to be doing. And so I mourn that, right? Because we haven't had a baby yet, and we don't own our own home. And yeah, so I do regret that. But then, like, other people have said, like, you're so lucky, Jesse. You do have this wisdom, and you have all this success with this book, and you're a professor because of what you went through. So I don't know. I don't know if I would have stayed on the level. Maybe I'd just be a produce manager at a grocery store, because that was my first job, and I was kind of satisfied there before everything went south. So yeah, it's something that keeps me up, but you know, I'll never get those years back. That's for sure. And
Yeah.
I think about that a lot.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
We have another question. You've shared some exciting news with us about your journey towards fatherhood. And
Yeah.
someone asked, as you look towards becoming a father, do you have any advice for fathers who grew up without positive role models?
Take your son to hockey practice on Saturday mornings. That's my advice, because of all the things that I look back on from my early childhood, it's the fact that I just didn't get to participate the same way that people around me did. They got to go to hockey with their dads, or baseball, or I did play basketball with my friend Brian's father, and that meant a lot to me. And my grandfather just didn't do that, you know. So put in the time. That's what that's about. Put in the time. Show up. You know, be at the after school teacher parent meetings, or go. You know, make sure you take them to hockey or basketball or whatever, because that's really, really important. And also camping. Camping's a big one. I used to get so jealous of my friends. I watched them go off with their dads camping for a little while. So
Yeah, those are great points. Jeff asks, do you think you'll write another book?
yes, actually, I am writing another book. It's my story of my uncle Ron. He was a professional bank robber in the 70s and 80s, and his stories, I'm going to fictionalize it because he was around some really heavy dudes. And it's really going to be about, like, the effects of intergenerational trauma from residential schools on my father's side of the family. So we're talking about my grandma Jackie's family from Timiskaming. It's going to be about that. And I've already signed with Simon & Schuster, and I've been doing a lot of research on Irish gangs, bank robbers, the stopwatch gang, just trying to get in that frame of mind of how I'm going to write that book. And it should be better than mine, because the material is a lot richer and more dramatic.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Mm.
So one more question. How did you figure out learning to trust was a major issue in your life?
Oh, yeah, trust. Well, trust for me started, the issue of not trusting started way back when I was 3. I could talk, and I just didn't. I didn't share my words with anybody, not even my parents. My brothers would hear me talk. And then the first person that I really talked to was my grandmother. And that continued for the rest of my life. I just didn't trust anybody. I was like a wounded dog almost, like it's hard to get near them. So that's how I was. And I just thought that was normal until I met Lucy, and then she kind of, you know, coaxed me out from underneath the porch with a pork chop or something. I don't know. She just got me to trust her, and I don't know. She did it unconditionally in a way that I understood. And through that, I've learned to trust other people. But I'm still wary, right? I just didn't learn that when I was a kid. So it's hard to relearn that as an adult.
Yeah. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today, and everyone who joined us and contributed questions, and to Joe for this amazing conversation that we've all been able to share. So I think our hour is up. So thank you so much, Jesse. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Take care, Nancy and Joe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.